Well, it's no such thing as job security anymore, and that's something Doug Collins and Andrea Arsenault know firsthand. This morning, they share their stories of being downsized as we continue our series looking at unemployment in New Brunswick. Andrea lost her job as a senior executive assistant with ACOA a few years ago and now works as an office manager in private healthcare. Doug moved to the Moncton area in 2004 for an executive position with a corporation. His job was cut in 2010 due to a sale, merger, and a realignment across North America as a result of the sluggish market conditions. Well, he joined me along with management consultant Pierre Bada to talk about what happened, and we'll start with Doug.
Moving to Moncton was a big transition, went through a terrible divorce. It was just coming to Moncton was a real shedding of a lot of things in my life, and I've got full custody of 3 kids, so I'm a single dad with 3 kids, living in Moncton, corporate job, traveling 2 weeks out of the month, just managing life. I mean, I had made a good salary and looked after my kids, and you know, when this news came, I was fortunate enough to find out indirectly through an email out of the U.S. that shouldn't have come to me that this transaction was happening. So I found out months before, which gave me a chance to prepare. But again, it was shock. What do I do? I mean, when I look at my career path, following the career I was in the industry I was in, I would have had to I moved to Ontario or the United States. My position does not exist in Atlantic Canada. And after everything my children have gone through, and we're settled in Riverview, life is good, they're playing hockey and gymnastics, I'm in the community, I'm making friends and just uprooting them and moving away after everything they've been through, everything I've been through, just it wasn't really an option.
I was part of the downsizing exercise the government had initiated a few years before, and nobody saw it coming. And at the time where I found out, I was in Montreal on vacation. And I get the call at 9 o'clock in the morning, and total shock. And then at 4 o'clock, I get a call that my 80-year-old mother, who I'm primarily responsible for, has been brought into the hospital with a collapse. So I had 2 things to process. So it was a very difficult kind of... and like Doug, I was in shock for quite a while, because for 3 months earlier, I had met the financial planner looking forward to next 5 years, because I was planning on retiring in 5 years, gone through all the process, and all of a sudden, poof,
wow.
It was. So it was a shock.
So Pierre, we've heard them both talk about that word of shock, and I'm once you get beyond that, how do people best cope with everything that's laid before them when they get that news?
These stories are fairly typical too, right? In terms of the piece, I think it's a very personal kind of reaction, and the work that I did for many years, I was in the room after someone like Doug or Andrew would receive the news. I would walk in moments later to work with that person and help them through that exercise. And some people, shock is the word that gets used a lot, and individuals move through the stages of grief from losing. Some individuals move through that fairly quickly. I had the pleasure of accompanying individuals who, within a fairly brief amount of time, were really kind of job ready, if you will. Others needed to take time, especially later in life, when you've laid out a path and it seems fairly locked in, and then that gets disrupted for reasons that are beyond your control. You can appreciate that people struggle with that. However, I was absolutely amazed in the years that I did this work at the resiliency of people. And that has a lot to do with a lot of things, right? So some of these individuals losing a job, if their identity was really wrapped up in their work, well, their world comes to an end. If it's people who have balance in their life and they have friends and family to support them through these pieces, individuals tend to move through this like most of us would. And you get over that shock and you get over the emotional piece, you cut ties with the former employer, and then the big task is, how do I reinvent myself and what do I do, right? And ultimately that question comes down to, do I keep doing what I've been doing all this time, right, as Doug explained, or do I really try to do something completely different?
So talk about that process. I mean, once the shock wore off and you were looking at your future and weighing out options, Doug, what were you going through then? What were you considering, and how did you make a decision on what the right path would be?
Yeah, well, I guess for me it was, I wasn't going to settle for less. I've always enjoyed a challenge. I've always, I worked for a company in Dartmouth, Nova Scotia for 16 years, and I changed jobs every 2 years. I mean, I was always moving up the ladder. I was always looking for that next challenge in the organization. And it's no different than then like Pierre says, I'm faced with this challenge of life. I'm going to reinvent I'm not settling for less. And I've always had the dream of being self-employed, working from home, creating my own future. When you're in the corporate world and you've got a 6-figure salary and the health benefits and stuff, it's hard to walk away from that, even if that's not your dream, because there's a security there, as secure as we think it is. But with the company was very good to me in the end, and got a nice severance package, and I figured now's the time to do it and go full time and work from home. And I haven't looked back. I'm in my 3rd year now. It was the greatest decision I ever made.
I'm lucky in a lot of ways, because as I was driving, the next day when I heard the news, I had to take a 12-hour trip back to Camelton, where my mother is, and I had the radio on, and within half an hour, they were talking about people that had the theme of the radio show was people that had lost their jobs, and how to address these. And 3 things that they were saying says you don't start working right now, you go see your financial advisor, and you go see somebody to help you process this. So got back home, went to see my financial advisor, didn't start working right now, and I called my good friend here, Pierre, who's been a friend, and sat down with just to kind of go over. And I was also extremely well surrounded by a group of friends that supported me through all of this year.
So I'd like to hear from each of you on what you're doing now, and if it's what you thought it would be, and how it compares to the careers that you had before. Doug?
Yeah, I think that it's been a lot of work. I'm working probably harder now than I did in the corporate world, but I'm enjoying the benefits of it. It's been a great journey. It's been a lot of discovering who I really am, I think. I'm not in a structure. I'm doing my own thing. I'm my own boss. So I got to wake up every day and motivate myself. I work with a team of people, part of a mastermind team. And it's been pretty exciting. So my part-time business that I had when I was in the corporate world became my full-time endeavor. I became an equity owner in another retail business, and it's been pretty fun. So the income I make, I get to reinvest it, and I get to do some things. And this other business that I have created a full-time job here in Moncton. My daughter has worked there part-time. I just dropped her off at college. She's made enough income to pay for school. We've created other part-time jobs. So there's spin-off benefits just from my decision that I've made. There's no security, and you really need to rely on your own efforts here to create a future. So.
It's interesting because whenever one of my responsibilities at work was to hire co-op students and work them through their program, the 4 months that they were there. And one thing that always looked on their resume was volunteer work if they didn't have the experience in the workforce. And I got this present job by doing some volunteer work. I put my name up for helping the municipal campaign in Dieppe, and the general manager for the candidate that was presenting himself, his wife was looking for a general manager part-time. And they looked at me and says, would you be interested? Went for an interview and got the job. And it was not something that I was looking for. It was certainly not in the area that that wanted to or even looked at. And it's worked out pretty well for me because I put myself out there, I guess, and wasn't totally. And I took 9 months off. It ended up being 9 months before I started working again part time. Certainly not the salary that I was making, but I'm doing okay.
So, Pierre, listening to these stories, how difficult is it for people to really pick up the pieces, especially in this region? I guess what I'm getting at is, are these exceptional stories?
I think these are fairly typical in the sense that many people who go through these kinds of challenges do land on the other side, but often with trade-offs. You know, whether it's Andrea speaking about the financial trade-off that she ultimately made in terms of a new role that doesn't pay the same way it does. Doug, I'm sure you missed some of the corporate kind of pieces that you've had to trade in terms of running your own business. So that's not an uncommon piece. I think geography is huge in that whole exercise, Jonna. You know, if you live in an area where the economy is somewhat buoyant, that's very different than if you're in a mill town, for example, and at 51 years old you lose employment, and then you need to reinvent based on a geographic area that may not be all that healthy from an economic point of view. So where you're doing this matters a lot. The resiliency that you bring to it personally, right? And I think Andrea nailed it when she said, you know, for many people, the most important thing you can do is take time to manage your next move and manage it around the financial piece and the other instances.
never ceases to amaze me when I hear people that go through experiences like this and they say, you know what, in hindsight, it's the best thing that could have happened. Do you feel that way?
I'm totally not. I think carry a little, because I didn't go out on my own terms, which is a little bit, I think, after so many years, I didn't think that I've put it aside, and I'm moving on from that. I'm gaining new experiences as I go along, and it's also given me time to a little more flexibility to when I need to go see to deal with my mom up north. So it kind of fell at the right time, I think. And I think what saved me, and I remember going to see Pierre and asking him, how do I transfer my skills that I've worked in an environment for 30 years? How do I transfer that to the private sector? And it's also fonction publique, federal government. So how do you transfer? And he kind of walked me through it, and I got a little comfort in saying it is transferable. You may not know it at the time, but it is transferable, which is okay. And I now have a comfort level that I'm still hireable. I can still be hired and can still do the work outside.
I was fortunate enough to learn, I think it was in August of 2010, I helped the company with the transition, and my position officially ended on December 31st. I was paid on salary, and then the severance kicked in. So January 2nd, I got started. I didn't waste time. And it was interesting because a lot of people said, like, you're not going to go look for a job. And I said, no, I'm moving forward. Like, I know what I want. And here I am just over 2 years later. And I look back at it and say that was the best turning point, the best incident in my life. And I think I was just able to work my way through that and turn it into something very positive. And now I'm doing what I've always wanted to do.